To discuss the issues raised in those reports, I'm joined now from Dunedin by Robert Patman, Professor in International Relations at the University of Otago. Thanks for joining us this evening, Professor. What should Western powers be doing now?
Sorry, can you just repeat that again, please? Sorry, Miriam.
What should Western powers be doing now?
Well, it seems to be the action they're taking is twofold. Firstly, they're stepping up diplomatic efforts. We know in the last 24 hours that the United States, Britain and France are going to table a new resolution in the Security Council which will call for quite extensive sanctions against Syria. Now, this is likely to be blocked by China and Russia. But if these measures are supported, I mean, Russia's been a little bit ambiguous because it hasn't ruled out economic measures. But my assessment of it is that the Western powers are trying, quite frankly, to smoke out the Russian position so that all can see that they are basically supporting the Assad regime. The second option, the second track, I should say, is a bilateral one. Hillary Clinton is working with the Russians to try to get out what's called the Yemen solution, which will be to try to persuade Assad to stand down. Now, the Russians are lukewarm about this idea. They said they don't rule out the possibility of some sort of transfer of power, but only, as the Russians euphemistically put it, if the Syrian people agree to that. Well, quite frankly, that's nonsense, because the Russians all along have been pumping arms into the Assad regime, so they obviously don't have much concern for public opinion in that country.
Why would they be softening their stance then?
Well, I'm not sure they're softening their stance. I think the Russians at the moment, there is tensions within the Russian government. There's some difference of emphasis now developing between Putin and the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, over what to do. And I think one of the things that the Western powers on the Security Council want to do is for China and Russia quite openly to be, if they're going to support Assad, they want the international community as a whole to see where they are. And I think, you know, this is a risk for Putin because, in a sense, it could be a very bad image problem for Russia. It's one thing to covertly support an authoritarian regime, but in the full glare of international attention in this globalised world, it could be a public relations disaster for Putin if he's seen as being an accomplice of this murderous regime in Damascus. And the other thing is, there is growing signs within the Russian media of criticism of Putin's position with respect to support for President Assad.
Be interesting to see how that resolution plays out then. There are some suggestions that the US would actually like to intervene because seeing Assad off weakens Iran. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think so at the moment. I think President Obama has probably got enough on his hands with Afghanistan and also winding down in Iraq. And I don't think he really wants to take on another military commitment in the election year. Interestingly, his opponent, Mr. Romney, doesn't show any appetite for military intervention either. But, you know, it doesn't. One thing I'm struck by the intensity now of the American effort in the Security Council. It's interesting to me that both Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, has actually said something quite outspoken. He said that President Assad has lost all legitimacy. And then we have a clip just before Kofi Annan. He's representing not just the UN, but the Arab League. He's the envoy for both with respect to Syria. He's basically saying we need measures now to ensure that the plan which the Russians publicly support is actually implemented. So the Russians are in a bit of a tight spot. They've been arguing all along that it's the Kofi Annan plan that they must be supported. They championed it, and so they're now being asked what are they going to do to make sure it's implemented. So it'd be interesting to see how the Russians you know, cope with these new pressures.
And what's your understanding of this idea that the Arab League could impose sanctions against Russia and China? That would surely have to be a last-ditch action.
I suppose so. I think the Arab League are now looking for the UN Security Council to act. And that is to respond to Kofi Annan's plea. As he put it, President Assad has to know there are consequences if he does not comply with the peace plan which he signed up to. And this is interesting because, in a sense, the Russians so far have been saying they want the Kofi Annan peace plan, but they're now going to be they're going to be tested publicly, and it'll be interesting to see. Now, the Americans, I think, also are giving Putin a way out through bilateral diplomacy, through this measure whereby there will be some sort of diplomatic agreement, a face-saving agreement from the Russian point of view, where Assad essentially is asked to stand down. But the thing that we don't know is that Putin may not have that much influence over President Assad. And all the indications is that President Assad is playing for keeps, winner takes all. He has no intention of standing down. He has no intention of political dialogue with his opponents.
We do have to wrap, but just very briefly, I mean, fingers are pointing every which way, trying to place blame for these recent massacres. But what matters is not so much who's behind them, surely, than that some action is taken at all.
Yes, I think it's very, very important that the international community indicates quite firmly to those responsible that this has simply got to end. This is not just a question of Syria's problem. This could spill over to neighbouring countries, particularly Lebanon.
We have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time. That's Professor Robert Patman in Dunedin there.